I think it would be really good if we could start by introducing ourselves. So I'm Mary Clegg, I'm the Chief Exec of the Green Party.
I'm Sarah Lunnon, I'm the coordinator of Extinction Rebellion's political circle.
I'm now Pethick and I'm on hunger strike and I come from the southeast of England.
I'm Heather Thomas, I'm the head of fundraising for the Green Party.
I'm Jo in the media team of Extinction Rebellion, I'm just sitting in.
I'm Petra, I'm one of the hunger strikers.
I'm Larch, part of Extinction Rebellion and I've been involved with the hunger striking as well.
I'm Amelia, I'm deputy leader of the Green Party.
I'm David Flint, I'm convener of the Climate Emergency Policy Working Group of the Green Party.
Thank you all very much. So yes, if we can start with your requests or the topics that you wanted to bring forward today.
So what we would like to do actually is to allow Petra and Lowe to actually speak about why they're taking the action and why they're on hunger strike. So I don't know, Petra would...
I can go first. So today is my 15th day of hunger strike. And I'm a lecturer at the university. I'm meant to prepare young people for the future. And I know that these young people, their future looks very much shaped by masturbation, droughts, massive floods. And I go into university every day and I know this truth. And I cannot be in my integrity to teach these young people without doing all I can to mitigate the worst. I just today, this morning, I read again the Guardian article about the tipping points. And I'm sure you all read the article. We're in a massive crisis. You know, our house is on fire. And we need everyone who is in some sort of position of power to do their best they can now to mitigate massive crisis. And I cannot urge you enough, and I know we all have our own priorities and our own lives we're in and the systems we're bound in. But this is an emergency. We all need to understand how crucial this is. So I just want to urge you to really take this meeting that we're going to have in this frame, in this understanding of this emergency.
Thank you. Thank you, Petra.
Thanks, Petra. And I speak as an 83-year-old, so grandmother. And because I've also been on hunger strike, it's a rolling hunger strike, I did 7 days and now 3 days. My words run away from me, so I've got to write things down, and I hope you don't mind. Okay, so you, like me, want the best for all of us. And I'm reminded of 1939, when we were faced with the might of an efficient war machine that brought us together. And in 3 years, our whole economy was turned round. Just 3 years. We had food rationing, so we grew our own food with much trade and barter between ourselves and the farmers. We had no television, planes or cars, no internet either. And we made our own fun such as we could. And as a result of all that, we ate more simply and we were much healthier. And despite the appalling carnage all over the world, we were actually happy pulling together. And now we face another crisis, which needs that joint political and people's will to come together again and confront climate change and ecological disaster. And I'm wondering who can be the character and the voice of Winston Churchill, whose inspired words brought us all together to bring about the impossible. Thank you.
I understand that you're having these conversations with all the political parties, but we'd hoped that there would be some, start from the perspective that we are on the same side completely and utterly. We are, your allies and in this with you. So this hopefully should be about building a common picture of what we can do together. And so that's, I suppose, why I'm coming back to saying, let's have the meeting as we'd kind of discussed and prepared. So I'd be keen to do that if we may look at your 3 demands bill and talk a bit about, David's kindly joined us today to talk a bit about how we've arrived at our position, and so we can talk through that so that we can get some sort of common position.
I would like to recognise the support given to Extinction Rebellion by the Green Party. From the moment of declaration on the 31st of October 2018, the Green Party was there, and at all of the major events, the elected Green Party politicians have shown up and have supported the actions taken by Extinction Rebellion. And so there's certainly within my mind, speaking for myself, there is no doubt that we are on the same page here, absolutely. And maybe that might make the conversation more difficult, I suppose, if you actually come to a disagreement, because disagreements between a family or close friends can sometimes be more difficult to bridge than those between the people that you are on a different page from. And so maybe that relates to some of the tension in the room today. But we are grateful and thankful for the support shown to us by the elected representatives of the Green Party, and indeed many people within Extinction Rebellion are members or have been elected politicians of the Green Party. So, yes, we're on the same page. Totally get that. And part of what I have found within Extinction Rebellion, and that Larch was alluding to by asking what you feel about the approaching catastrophe and crisis, is that it's given people that space for grief and to actually recognise those feelings that are driving us, which I've not found, have not found within any other organisation. And it's part of what I think allows people or enables us to take action and say things which are difficult and uncomfortable because of that emotional resonance that's behind them. And I guess that's why we were inviting you to express how you feel, because part of what drives us is not just the science and that logical understanding of what policy needs to be put in place. It's that desperate feeling of grief and anxiety when we look towards the future. And so the invitation was so that you can understand what drives us as Extinction Rebellion, as opposed to policy and practice and questions and motions and that very technical scientific side of things. It's a translation of the science into the emotion.
And so this tell the truth is it's a personal practice as well as being our first demand. So it's like it's not like a tick box, and I understand that we're coming from a shared multi-decadal approaching this issue and commitment to this issue. So I absolutely acknowledge that. But for me, that daily practice it's never going to be a tick box exercise. It's like there's constantly stripping away layers. So there's this concept now, isn't there, of soft denial, that we're all on some level. And it's only really since coming across Extinction Rebellion, as I said, 1.5 years ago, that I've really allowed the emotion in and allowed, therefore, to see the levels of denial that I have still in this subject. And so for that tell the truth is a constant process of stripping away those layers of denial. And that way I can actually see that myself and Trump, we're all in the same continuum. And that's not just a matter of me pointing the finger at him and saying he's bad, he's in denial. That's actually look at my own levels of denial and stripping that away, because it's so vast and so scary to look at. There's bound to be that. So it's just having that humility. So I really wasn't coming at it from a place of judgment at all. It's just, but as Petra was saying, that vulnerability and that humility to bring that into it. And for me, that's it means that I'm showing up every day as best I can to do whatever I can do each day to address this crisis. And I feel I can only do that by that constant process of exposing myself to it. And it's uncomfortable and it's painful. So who would do that? Who would choose to do that? But that's what we're called to do at this time, to be the most effective we can be in this situation. So yeah, sorry if it wasn't communicated in that way initially. Thank you for bearing with us. And so then it's a personal practice, and it's also then this, as a nation, when we're telling the truth, then what's going to be possible is so different. And I think this is something that's really important for us all to try and understand. Is like, when we personally are in that process of telling the truth, we're able to lead and inspire others to come with us on that journey. And in a way that we can't if it's just an intellectual exercise. And this is what Lowe was talking about with the Second World War, in that we could turn our economy around in 3 years because everyone was on board. There was this sense of pulling together, which we don't yet have with this crisis. And I'm sure we all agree that this is the greatest threat humanity's ever faced. And that's a great common ground to have. You know, we're all on that page. So, but what will it look like when the whole country is telling the truth and recognises how serious it is? So that's another thing to really bring to this conversation, is that we don't know. This is uncharted territory, and that's a key piece of the equation that I think most politicians aren't yet engaging with. So when we're talking about dates and timetables and that, we just know that this is a movement into the unknown, and that key bit of telling the truth personally and then as a nation is vital to that, because it's only when everyone's pulling together, knowing the truth, that we can see what's possible. So I feel like otherwise, it's an intellectual exercise of what's possible from where we're at, but where we're at is absolutely needs to shift and is moving. So that's just to kind of really name that as well. Okay, thank you. So now we can move on to talking about more the details of the of the bill and what's involved and how we get there. You know.
Well, thank you for letting us express ourselves. That was good, and you were listening.
And they're incredibly moving. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Bill, I have copies.
Thank you. You send them through
We have
previously
copies.
as well, so
Yeah.
And
you're welcome to leave them, but thank you. I'm just conscious of space.
Yeah, we might.
Yeah. I think you've got a draft. This is obviously
more finalised version.
Yeah, there's it's got pretty pictures on the back. And with pretty much my understanding of the Act is that the problem that the Green Party has with it is the zero carbon by 2025
Yes.
date.
But also I think that one of the key things on this, because I know that we've talked about this before, Sarah, is that I think that we have shown, as you said, we've shown support for Extinction Rebellion. We've been there from the start because of the shared values and the shared sense of urgency. And I think that it's not, the 2025, I think, is a really powerful target. But I think that one of the aspects of what I've done when I've supported Extinction Rebellion on Radio 4, and actually when being challenged by these questions about targets, I think it's been quite important that we're able to talk, as I've said to you before, people said it was impossible to put a man on the moon, but we did it because we had that belief. And I think that there are aspects of, we're not saying that there's an issue as such with the 2025, it's that the mechanisms that we've got to get there at the moment get us to being able to orbit the moon. And although we're working on any potential to see how we can change that by putting money into research and development and putting aspects into that angle, so that we hope we can meet it sooner. But this is the blueprint that we've got at the moment, and we're welcoming any opportunity to have any other blueprints so that we can be able to do that. Then I think that at the moment we're doing we're supporting the calls for 2025 in a way of saying that we want to be able to meet those demands before, but our blueprint that's been signed off by conference, because we know that this is what's scientifically possible, is 2030, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we're specifically conflicting, it's just that we're not able to sign up in the same way.
So, it's scientifically possible for us to meet zero carbon by 2025.
We disagree.
Well, it is possible.
We disagree.
Scientifically, it's possible because we would just stop emitting carbon, right? It's not, it's the political, economic and social credibility of the target that is the issue.
So stopping emitting carbon would mean ceasing to heat our homes.
Yes.
That's what you mean by scientifically possible.
Well, the point is, it's not scientifically impossible to do it. There is the scientific possibility. It is logically possible that we could do it. It's like some things are not possible.
It is not contrary to the laws of thermodynamics, I think you're saying.
Okay.
And that is true. Yes, yes. You're right. At that level, if we stopped heating our homes and stopped running our industries and very possibly stopped eating, though I'm not quite sure about that one, and other things will occur to you if we stop moving around, then our carbon emissions would go down. Yep, and that's right. If we could, yeah. So in that sense, you'd be right.
So what is required, and like the Second World War, like putting the man on the moon, we did not know how we were going to do either of those things when we started doing them. There was no plan to follow. We had to work the plan out when we started taking the action. And in terms of the Second World War, because it was required, in terms of putting the man on the moon, because that became a national endeavour when JFK got shot as a kind of a memorial to him that those things happened. And Extinction Rebellion, our feeling is that we need to aim for this. So we cannot sit here and say this is how it will be done. We recognise there is not a plan to do it, but we also recognise that we have a finite carbon budget to even have the smallest percentage of a chance of staying below 2 degrees centigrade. And that finite carbon budget is not going to change because of our political and social circumstances, because of our economies. And you guys know that. Right? And if we have a fixed carbon budget to spend, if we spend it over 5 years, we can spend more in each of those 5 years than if we spend it over 10 years. And if we want to get to zero carbon within that budget by 2030, we have to cut even greater in the beginning because we have to front load it so we can extend it out to 2030. So we're actually asking for a more radical cut if we're going to stay within the 2030 budget. And I accept that there is an issue with having a zero carbon target as opposed to having a budget target. But whichever way we look at it, we need radical change to stay within and that was in 2014 that budget was put forward, and all the evidence seems to suggest that our climate sensitivities it's much more sensitive, our climate, than we at first thought. So we're left in a very, very uncomfortable position, aren't we? Yeah. We go for 2025, we have the carbon we can spend, the budget over 5 years. We go out to 2030 or 2040, we have the same budget, but we have to spend less each year. Mm-hmm. So either we go for massively radical cuts at 2030, or we go for less immediate cuts and we spend the budget all in 5 years. So in a way, going out to 2030 is even more radical than asking for 2025 in terms of the carbon cuts that we'd have to do.
I think as a political party, we have to put forward not merely targets, but also plans. We have to say what sort of measures we would recommend. And for a political party, there are some constraints around that. For instance, the requirement that we could bring our agricultural emissions down by everyone becoming vegan. Yeah, individually we may do that, but as a piece of public policy, it's really pretty difficult. Similar considerations apply to flying and indeed to almost everything. So our view is that in developing a policy, and we've spent about 5 years within the party, not only developing policy, but building mathematical models. I won't try and share the mathematical model, but I'm very happy to share, if I can find the damn thing. Yep. I'm not suggesting we discuss this, it's just to indicate the degree of the thought that's gone into it. And there's probably nothing here, because it doesn't actually have numbers and timescales on it. But it's the kind of things that I think we all know that we need to do. So we've taken the view, as I think a political party must, that we have to keep people in comfort in their homes. Perhaps not quite as comfortable. We have to preserve mobility. We have to keep jobs. And all those things have consequences. And when you work through the consequences, it turns out, our estimates are, that getting to zero by 2030 is going to be really hard, to the degree we don't see all the things we need to do it. We can get 80% there. Now, given that we think is the best we can see how to do, it is conceivable that a citizens' assembly elected and following from a profound change in public sympathy, which you people, I recognise and praise, are trying to achieve. You know, I've had a very small part in exile myself, but I'm very small. So, you know, you are driving the change in this. If that change occurs, different things may become possible. People may be prepared to sign up for changes that they won't currently do. But I think as a political party, we have to be pitching from where we are now and moving people. And we do, and that's the position, that's the policy set we've generated. And 2025 does not make sense within that frame. I appreciate your frame is different, but within our frame, and the need, for instance, to have our leaders go up in front of Andrew Neil, for instance, and defend the numbers. And bear in mind that the numbers are huge. Our money budget for solving the problem is about £1.5 trillion. That's a lot of money. It is what is necessary in our view. If we spend that over a decade, we will make a really big impact. Not perfect, but it's what we need. So we're not afraid of major change, but we think it needs to be on the basis of a plan we can believe in. So that's the framing in which we say, well, first of all, politically we can't agree to 2025 because conference has said 2030 and we are a democratic organisation. But over and above that, we don't think it's possible.
So just to pick up on the process within the party, because that's something I'd love to get a clarification on in the meeting. So Jonathan expressed in his meeting with Larch and Fahad general support for the bill. Okay. And it's, my understanding was an openness to sort of explore within the party what it would take for the party to be supporting the bill. Given that we're in an emergency, yes, and that we need action and we need this next government to be the government that addresses the emergency, that's the time frame. We don't have time for a future government to do it. Yes. What would be the if we can't afford to wait for another party conference in order to get behind the bill, because then we're going to miss a big chunk of that window. So what's the process? How could we get, given what you've just said about as you're seeing it at the moment from the lens you have, 2030 anyway, but what would be the process for putting it to the party to see if the party could support the bill?
Okay, right. Understand I cannot commit the party. I can only say what the options are. Yeah. And I'll give you two answers. The first answer, following our constitution and proper method, would be that a motion needs to go into the party procedure by the 3rd of January. That gets fed through to conference, which occurs at the end of February. So we're not looking at a huge amount of time, When it comes to party conference, then if the groundwork has been done, and if the people who speak for the motion persuade conference, conference can pass it. But conference might not. So that would be the timescale for a change in policy.
There's also the added complication that it has come to conference once. And so
Yes, but that was in 2017.
it came back this conference.
Yes, but we referred it back.
Oh, to be referred
So
back.
we
Yeah,
can revisit it. We did. This was on the floor of conference. 2025 was on the floor of conference 2 months ago. Conference decided not to finish the debate on the basis that it would be divisive within the party. Now, you may like or dislike that, but it's what happened. My guess is that that would also happen in February, but it might not. So the standard process, the democratic process, would be that. There is a theoretical possibility for the Green Party Regional Council, the supreme authority between conferences, to change the policy. It would have to override a previous conference decision, something which is really not quite proper, and I don't think it would be willing to do it. Amelia, would that be your sense?
Yeah, I think that, especially as it's being referred back, then I think that it does, as you said, open the gate for the opportunity for it to come back to conference. The key thing, though, is that, if GPRC did override that conference decision, it would create a frustration in the party. We are very proud of how we use democracy in our party, where the grassroots up. In fact, so many of our policies are so diverse and interesting and radical because they are brought by members. That means that we can challenge different parts of society that we maybe don't know ourselves. That means that we're able to create things, quite dynamic policies in a way that I think that other parties simply can't. And to override that and to override our internal democracy is something that, as Sarah will know, something that the membership get quite frustrated about, understandably, because we should all have an opportunity to have a say in our vision. In fact, I'm not a leader of the party. I'm effectively a spokesperson. I speak to the policies that are created by our membership. The leadership comes from the bottom up. And I think that that's a point of pride that I have in the way that we run it.
I suppose I should put a third thing into the process, which is that conference in the summer charged my working group with making our policies better, of closing the gap between zero carbon and the best we can see. I've been running an activity to do that over the last 4 months. And without going into detail, I can say it has been extremely hard to make progress, but large-scale progress. We can make incremental progress. It's been really quite difficult. And that's what I reported to conference last time, and it's what I expect to be reporting to conference in February. So given that we have this activity going on, which has a conference mandate, it would be quite difficult to adopt a target which is in conflict with it.
I keep wondering how this conversation would be going if we were all really hungry.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would probably be different.
I really want us to bear that in mind,
Yes.
because that's what we all face.
Yeah.
Thank you.
David, what is the carbon budget for your plan that's required to get, does it fit within the 1.5 budget?
No, it fits within, okay. The 1.5 budget is a global budget,
Yep.
isn't it?
Yep.
So that's, and it's important to, we all know it's a global problem, but just to restate it, it's a global problem. The UK, the global problem, the IPCC report said 0 by 2050, 45% down by 2030, globally would do it. We are all agreed that is not an adequate party for the United Kingdom. We must do better for a mixture of moral and practical reasons, which I'm sure we all agree. So that's the first part of the answer. We have driven off that consideration. If you then have to say, what is the share of the global budget that accrues to the UK? If you take the strictest moral approach to that, the one in Tim Jackson's paper, for which there is a good moral case, then yes, our plan breaks it. Now, I am not going to say that it doesn't, because plainly it does. I don't have that number in my head. and actually there are some difficulties with it because the plan doesn't in fact quite finish. But but the reality is that we are in breach of that budget. But my view is that morality has multiple aspects, and one of the aspects is that if the actions we take crash our economy, throwing people out of work and creating austerity and all sorts of bad things, that is not a morally good answer. Important to say this is not a morally good answer. The same sort of criticisms attract to it as would attract to the Tory policy and the coalition policy over the last 9 years, and I don't want to be standing for that kind of policy. So that is a relevant thing, just as the wider climate context is an morally relevant factor.
So I don't know, one of the other policies that we put in place that I think is also quite powerful was, I don't know if you saw our policy on having a carbon chancellor. So instead of having a chancellor of the Exchequer, that actually having someone that looks at the carbon budget while looking at policy to mean that it's properly managed through a central point of government budgets. And I think that in that, even with things like that, although it's a smaller take on how we reach these, how we work with a carbon budget, I think it shows a fundamental way of how we create the mechanisms of doing it, rather than just having policies and investment, having a double check on how we manage it.
So, just to pick up on the discussion we just had about process and what that might be within the party, is the attention we have is that right now we've got this window with the election, and we, given that this election has to be the emergency election, and it's not yet in the way it needs to be, so there's still some time, but part of our invitation, to you, heard Petra about the positions we've all got of power, is to use that platform to tell the truth, and we would say that, that we can all do more on that. That yes, I appreciate what you're saying about kind words about Extinction Rebellion and how the Overton window it is shifting, but clearly it's got a long way to go, yes. And that each of us can play that role. And part of that telling the truth is to tell the truth around the urgency and the seriousness, because we cannot hope to bring people with us on that journey if they're not aware of the situation and how urgent it is. So most people now have heard of an emergency, but that's just a word. It's like, this is that thing about, by us letting it in, we can help support the rest of the country to do that. Our question is how we use this election, the next 12 days, 10 days that we've got left, to take this agenda forward to the maximum that we can. There are candidates now that are stepping up to say that they will support the bill, and that will help to project that conversation forward. One of we met with the leader of Plaid Cymru, for example, and his position was, that as a party leader, he can only speak for the party, and that party had agreed 2030, just as you have, but that he is absolutely open to that being done faster than 2030 if he's persuaded that that's possible, and he's certainly open to his candidates under the banner of Plaid endorsing the bill with a more ambitious, with the target of 2025. So it's not something he would, whilst he as a party can only support the policies that they've agreed as a party, just as you're saying, he is absolutely supportive of candidates within that party framework still supporting the bill. Is that something that you would also, a position that you could also take, so that individual candidates would be free still to support the bill?
Well, I think that is our position. I mean, we do not operate a whipping system. We have a standard principle in the Green Party that candidates, and indeed all party members, can express their personal opinions. If that is different from party policy, they are required to say, this is my view, but the party's view is this. And of course, candidates rarely find a need to say that, but it does occasionally happen. So we already have that, it's just built into our structure. In terms of if there, what Plaid Cymru man said, whose name?
Adam Smith.
Adam Price.
Adam Price, sorry, I'm keep getting
Oh,
I keep making a mistake.
Wallace.
Yeah, anyway, Adam Price, thank
Adam
you.
Price,
Yeah.
yes. It is what Adam Price said.
Smith.
And in terms indeed of what he said in the climate debate, which I thought was generally good but rather weak on agriculture, but never mind that.
Indeed.
Never mind that. If there is an evidence-based plan that will get us to zero before 2030, that's great. Show me, and I will advocate it to conference. I have no hesitation in saying if there is a plan, then I will stand for it, and I think conference will be persuaded. But it has to be a solid plan, and
Why?
the attempt because that's the frame in which we work, Sarah.
But we
as I was saying.
didn't in 1938. We didn't say we need a solid plan to be able to beat the Nazi Germany. We said we need to do this. So let's start right now because we faced an emergency. And it seems to me what 2025 does really, really successfully as a date. It says you have to start right now, even if you don't know how you're going to get to 2025. You have to start thinking about it. There is no time to go, I'll put that off for 6 months. I'll put it off for 12 months because 2030 is quite a long way away, isn't it? You know.
Put it off until we're hungry.
So
In 1939, we did have a plan. The building of secret factories started in 1936 and was already underway. Some of the rearmament was already underway. We did, in 1939, have a plan. It was a wretched plan and it didn't work out.
Well,
but we
your
had a plan,
analogy-
so it's not the case that we
your
didn't have a plan.
analogy stands, David. We have a plan to combat the climate and ecological emergencies, and it's a wretched plan, and we need a better one.
Yes.
What would be the? We could start looking at how to achieve 2025. Surely the Green Party would say, do you know what? If you want to try for 2025, let's see how we can get there. Let's have a national conversation about it. Let's authorise Parliament to determine if and how it can be done for 2025. Because if we try for 2025, we just might make 2030. If we try for 2030 and we miss, it's, the risk of tipping points, the risk of us cascading into hothouse Earth, it's all there. It's so very, very real, and it gets so much more real if we miss 2030 than if we miss 2025. And what the Green Party does, and has done so well in terms of politics, is it puts what seems like an extreme point out there to be talked about, and it makes other politicians respond to it and move to it. And that was so noticeable when Caroline got elected in 2010. The I agree with Caroline line. And you, as the Green Party, have the opportunity to do that now. We're making the noise outside of Parliament. We've moved the Overton window as Extinction Rebellion, and now it needs you to take it up and be courageous, because it's not about hope or optimism now, it's about courage. It's not even about the success of the Green Party as an elected, as a democratic party. It's literally about whether we can protect and defend life on Earth. It's not about being reasonable anymore or what's credible.
But Sarah, that's what we've done. By adopting 2030 as our target in 2017, we set a standard which Labour has moved to.
And now move it again.
We don't
Because
need to move it again. We need to
even more
fulfil
radical.
the plan. We need to get the thing real and not keep moving the goalpost. 2030, which has been the target date in declarations of climate emergency right around the country, on which Green councillors have worked, started by Carla Denyer in Bristol, Green councillor. So we have got the movement by setting a stretch goal. 2030 is a stretch goal. It is not an easy thing to achieve.
Nobody's saying
Nobody's saying it is. So we believe. You say, why don't we move to 2025? I say, why don't you move to 2030? Because 2030 was there first. It is the consensus across the movement of where we want to be. That's why the Climate Emergency Declaration says it. That's why Green Policy says it. That's why Labour says it and then says we can't quite do that. We want to hold their feet to the fire on this.
The reason we won't go to 2030 is because it's about what's necessary. It's about the the science. The science is so clear that actually, there's a strong body of science that says it's too late. That we stop all emissions tomorrow, we still have triggered, we're seeing feedback loops triggered that were supposed to come in 90 years' time,
I recognise that.
So any single, literally, like this is why my daily practice is every day, how can I use my day to the fullest to address this? Because every day that we delay is death, is people dying around the world, and it's an exponential increase in the risk for everyone, for all life. So, it's so stark and so clear that we have to, do everything we possibly can. And talking about 2030, not only, in addition to all of the science that we're talking about, it's as we said before, we are complex beings, we're emotional beings as well as rational beings, and the emotions drive us a lot more. So setting a date of 2025 has a huge symbolic, psychological and emotional impact that we are not drawing on. It's that thing, part of the reason we failed as a movement, it was the messaging was things like, like Al Gore's film, it's really bad to turn off your light bulbs, and just it did not fit. The things we were asking did not. So if we say it's an emergency, and we can get there by 2030, it's not true according to the science. That's the science is that if we aim for 2030, we are unfairly and immorally increasing the risk to everyone. If we aim for 2025, we're telling people that actually this is how serious it is. And so then it's shifting the conversation. It's part of the practice of telling the truth and shifting that conversation. Because clearly we haven't done the job of telling the truth yet, because people don't know how serious it is. So, the date is partly how we tell the truth and how we shift the conversation.
Yeah. Larch, how does this setting of a target relate to the 98% of the global emissions that are not generated in the UK?
Because do not underestimate the significance of the UK. If the UK steps up to the plate to address this emergency, it will have a disproportionate impact around the world.
Yes.
There are millions of people desperate for action on this. We see that with the school strikes, which are almost in every country in the world. We see that with Extinction Rebellion, which is in over 70 countries now. So the UK has incredible soft power around the world. So it actually adds to the importance of us all individually stepping up in this time and using this election as part of that.
I accept that.
We go for global zero carbon by 2030. It's part of the 2030 target.
Okay. Right, we all know how likely that is to be achieved, but let me not talk about pure inertia. I think that there is always a judgment as to what degree of extremism gets to the point of making you not credible. My sense is that 2030 is already at the point where it is hard to believe in, not in this room necessarily, but outside this room. If we want to influence other countries, if in particular we want to influence people in the US and China, the two biggest emitters, then a degree of credibility is required. I think 2025 breaks that credibility and makes it easier to dismiss. I think 2030 is just about within the limits of what they can consider.
Yeah, and with all due respect, when Extinction Rebellion formed, throughout the whole time, people were telling us how we should or shouldn't shift the Overton window.
Yes.
And people said things like the name will put people off, the tactics will put people off. And actually what we've seen is the Overton window has shifted.
Yes.
So I feel like Extinction Rebellion has demonstrated an ability to shift the Overton window beyond, with all due respect, other parties, and myself included. For 30 years we've been trying this and it hasn't worked to the way that it has now. So
we had to change what we did, and you did it. And
yes, and having had some success, partial success at getting us in the direction we need to go with this Overton window shift, we are saying that this date is part of that, and so I feel like that voice needs to be heard, because we have demonstrated some ability to do that, which others haven't. I'm not saying that Extinction Rebellion is the only one at all,
no.
But I'm just saying that there are some facts there that we do need to consider, So Yeah, sorry, I lost track of what I was going to say.
So I'm conscious that we're reaching the end of the period of this meeting. I hope we've all heard each other and understood what is being said. I mean, I'm taking away from this David's point about revisiting policy at conference at the end of February. I'm also understanding that from your perspective, that's not your ideal outcome, that's not what you were wanting to take away from today. But our democracy, our internal democracy is important to us as a party, and stepping outside that is not something we do. So I don't know if others have got comments or summary statements or bits they want to say as well.
Just to clarify without doubt, so I think it is useful to know that individual candidates can still support the bill and can get behind the bills if they specify. So that's really helpful, because we have a number of candidates that are now adopting the bill, and that's for us a key thing of how we use this election. We get candidates to support the bill so that when we are in the next government, we've got some commitment to try and at least bring the bill to Parliament. And I remember the other thing I was going to say, which was that in a way all of this discussion around policy is a moot point, because it's what's at stake is so big that we need every tool in the box, and we cannot afford the risk of trying to address this crisis through conventional means of a party comes up with policies and puts it to the country. We need the country on board. We need to bring everyone on board with us, which is why the tell the truth bit's important, and it's why the process of the Citizens' Assembly is important. So actually what we're asking is not for you or anyone else to go in a room and come up with all the solutions. And though that's been the paradigm, we're asking to move beyond that and to say, actually, there's a process here. Let's put it to the Citizens' Assembly. And they can decide if it's possible and how it's possible. So there's an element of which, we're not asking you to put all your credit, your status on the line and say it's 2025 and that's it. And if it fails, we fail. It's like actually have that openness and humility to go, folks, we are in a dire situation. No one has the blueprint for how to get out of this crisis. We know, and let's do our best to create a process which seems to bring us in that way. We know from the examples of citizens' assemblies that they can bring people with us in a powerful way. Yep. So let's get behind that and give that citizens' assembly, as a matter of urgency, the mandate to kind of look at this and try and bring the country with us.
Okay. And that's why, round the country, there are hundreds of Green Party candidates online, in person, on the doorstep, in hustings, making the case for urgent action. Our people are out there doing it. Our leaders are speaking in debates and in interviews. We are already making this case. I think you recognise that. It's what we can do because we have that degree of access, because we have a party machine. Everyone needs to do what they can.
If the government said we want to aim for zero carbon by 2025, would you stand up as a Green Party and say, don't think that's achievable, go for 2030? Or would you say, fuck, right, see if you can do it. Good idea, let's give it a go.
I don't think it's a real question. Because I don't think it's a real question. I don't think governments do that. And I think to suggest they do misunderstands the way governments operate, which is that they come to objectives on some consideration of what's achievable.
Okay, let's put it...
Let's
frame this slightly differently. If Plaid Cymru went to that position and said, right, actually, we get it, we're convinced we'll go for 2025, would you say that's not real, or would you say, wow, look, we'll get behind them and try and...
I think one of the points that, as David's highlighted, is that we have a process in place that means that our conference would need to sign 2025. So it's about how we use that process, and I think it would probably be far better to be maybe discussing how we could use that process rather than putting questions out, because I feel that even if Plaid Cymru did say 2025, it would be quite, as we've said, it's quite tough for us to then come out and say that without due process to make sure that we are representing the party. So in some ways, I think that if we're going to question this, the first point comes back to how do you get it through conference, and that will always be the way. And I mean, you've talked about citizens' assemblies, and that has been a core part of what we've said in our manifesto, and we've supported citizens' assemblies for since the beginning. And I think it's really important to note that I think that we're talking about targets, but you said no one's got the blueprint to come out of this, but I think that one of the things about our manifesto is that what we have is the plan for 2030, and if there's, as I said before, if there's a chance to change that, with research and development, things are changing all the time. And I think that it's not saying that 2025 isn't possible, it's saying that we've got the plan for 2030, and that it's really important, as David highlighted, that when, even on Politics Live just last Friday, it was I was told that 2030 wasn't possible, and being able to have the evidence behind it to show exactly how 2030 was possible made sure that debate didn't descend to lose credibility for our whole movement and lose credibility for that future. And I look around the world at the moment, and when you look at what happened in Brazil with the burning of the rainforest, that was a backlash as a result of people feeling like the environment had been given too much support over people. And I think one of the things with the rise of the far right around the world at the moment, one of the things that I am deeply concerned about, in 2007, climate, for the first time in history, a fear of climate change for the first time in history overtook a fear of terrorism. And after the economic crash, that changed. I just think what would happen if there hadn't been that economic crash, if there hadn't been people who were fearing something else other than climate, what would happen if there wasn't a rise of people who were creating some of those far-right agendas in other places in the world. We could have got a lot further in this climate discussion. We would have been able to have moved people with us. And I think that when I'm thinking about policy and how we communicate policy, a lot of that is feeling of how you do bring people with you, because make sure that people feel like it embeds their needs as people, because if there's a backlash against your policies, like we saw with the yellow vests in France, then it taints the movement and it brings us back, and we don't have time for that either. And I think it's quite important that we reflect on those points as well, not just the science, not just the targets, but sometimes how our actions can change things in politics that hold us back instead of take us forward.
Absolutely, and that's why there's telling the truth has to come first. Like people have to know how serious it is in a way that they don't at the moment, and then the Citizens' Assembly can step in, and come up with an approach. It cannot be. It's just way too risky for any party to try and push up an agenda to get us out of this crisis. That's just not going to work, because the changes are so radical. So I think we're agreeing on that. It's just how we get there. And you're talking about the potential for research and development to speed things up. And we're saying actually the starting point has to be awareness. Has to be people telling the truth and understanding it. That's going to shift things far more than the research and development, which will play a part. But once people understand how serious it is, then things will shift in a way that they've started to, but we're only just scratching the surface. I
just feel that we have told the truth, and I think that that's been quite an important part of who we've been as a party. And I know that when I ran a campaign about flooding a couple of years ago, talking about the impacts of climate change and ecological destruction, and how we needed to tackle flooding in our communities, talking about the destruction of homes, buildings, and even the potential loss of life wasn't an easy thing. People were saying that I was playing on people's emotions, that I was saying something wrong. And actually here we are now, and I think that we have said those tough things that haven't kind of watered down the edges.
It's not a fixed thing though. The truth is constantly changing. I'm not criticising anyone.
I wonder if we could come to some kind of agreement about how to move.
Yeah.
What points we can agree on, because I think we could discuss this all day.
Done that.
Yes. So I mean, in terms of supporting Extinction Rebellion's 3 demands, the Green Party would support demands 1 and 3. I'm assuming, but sees 2025 as not credible, or how would that, if we wish to do a press release from this meeting, or would you say 2025 would be a good target, a good would be.
So it's not our current policy. Our current policy is 2030. We've talked to you clearly about how we can re-explore that with conference, and we're comfortable to do that. From what David's saying, the issue has been referred, so it's, you know, it's there, it's live. We can pick it back up at policy.
Could I ask one more question?
Mm-hmm.
I understand that this is all extraordinarily politically difficult. In the event of a real catastrophe hitting, so that we are all hungry, do you have a contingency plan?
No, we do not have a contingency plan. I have given some thought to scenarios that might play out, but none of that is in any sense Green Party policy. The problem with the question is just how bad you think it's going to get, and there are possibilities of it becoming very bad indeed,
Yes.
of deaths in the billions.
Yes.
I think we all know that is a possibility. I don't know how you make a plan for that case. Beyond the obvious option of buy yourself a hill and put machine guns on it.
That's not obvious.
Which is not really a great answer.
It doesn't work.
Probably not. But the issue is that if you are talking about that degree of social breakdown, you're talking about a society that is going to be run by warlords, not by people like us. And the making of plans by people like us is probably pretty irrelevant.
I think one of the things about your three demands is I've always felt that we support XR in your demands. It's that we have a different, we've got a different framework, and I think that there is a role of saying how we do support you calling for that, although we have the plan for 2030 ourselves. And I think that I think that's a slightly, it's not that we don't support your proposals for what you do and what you're trying to achieve. It's that we've got the plan for something slightly different.
So I suppose, like, would you as the Green Party be dismayed to see this bill presented as a private member's bill before the Houses of Parliament? I mean, would it be you would see it as something that, you know, is harmful to what you want to happen or beneficial?
That's why I said that we support what.
But I guess, so for this bill to become a presentation bill, it needs to be supported by elected representatives.
Yes.
And if the Green Party has elected representatives, will they, like, sign up to this bill being tabled? I mean, that's what support means, right?
That's a question put to them. We don't mandate our MPs. I mean, personally, I would welcome that bill being introduced as a private member's bill. I've no problem with that. Private members' bills are useful in assembling support and changing the conversation.
So would the Green Party make a public statement then? Would you make a statement saying that you would welcome this bill being put forward as a private member's bill within the Houses by...
I think that would potentially put some of our elected representatives into a difficult position of understanding their role of supporting members or supporting... So I think that it comes back to that crucial point that we keep coming back to that conference motion.
Absolutely.
And the best thing to be doing is to be talking about how we get a conference motion that shows the evidence-based policy of how we can work with this, with point B. And I think that that's always going to be a sticking point until it's changed.
It's kind of building a sort of catch-22 though there, in that we won't support the bill until there's a plan, and in a way there isn't going to be a plan unless the target of 2025 receives some kind of political support that makes it more credible. So it's, you know, someone needs to jump off the cliff, right, at some point, and you guys have the Green Party has the ability to politically move the conversation. We're moving it outside. You know, people are talking about 2025. That's the Tim Jackson paper has come out, which refers to 2025. So we're doing it outside, but we need some people to start doing it within the political arena, right? At the coalface of politics.
I think we've talked previously about how this has been part of the conversation at conference, and that we can take it back and have that conversation there again, which we're very willing to commit to.
Okay.
So in terms of practically, it's, the relationship to this bill is that you support Extinction Rebellion bringing forward, but can't commit to individual candidates because that's their decision.
Mm-hmm. Or even as the leadership of the Green Party, you're not able to say we would support this being tabled.
I think that's something that I'd potentially have to talk to other people about as well, but I think that's it's not, but I think that it's this word support that I struggle with, because in terms of support, we do support ambitious targets. It's that we have a plan for a different target. And in this general election, we're not going to be able to present a new plan. And I think the fact that our plan has the credibility behind it of evidence of how we deliver it is really important. And I think we can talk about how we can aspire to 2025, and I'd love to be able to aspire to 2025. I think it's really important to have those aspirations. As I said before with the putting a man on the moon analogy, I think that in this election, the fact that we've written out that plan as it stands it is the fastest target. It is something we're still having to challenge people's understanding on, and if it's possible. And I think that in these next 12 days that I potentially could talk to the other members of the leadership team, so that I'm not just speaking on behalf of everyone, but we are in a position where we are spokespeople for our party, and that we take, as you know, we take the policy made by our membership, and we're spokespeople for that. And I think that as somebody who really passionately believes in how we build from the grassroots, and why our policy is set like that, so that everyone feels represented, I think is quite an important aspect of our job.
It's because it's so important to us that we're hesitant to say that we support a particular thing, because we see it, because it is so important that we get it right from our point of view.
We had actually understood that we were going to meet Sean or Jonathan, not that I'm not delighted to see you, Amelia. So it was a bit of a surprise on Friday to be told that we were going to meet with the deputy leader rather than
I haven't been any party to a conversation where that's been mooted. This is the group that...
No, you initially, I said a co-leader, but you didn't know which one yet because of their timetabling. So that was our understanding based on that email.
But even if you had got Sean and Jonathan here, as you know, the conference is, that's where policy is made.
Sure. So, but
they can't suddenly step outside that either.
Sure. But one of the demands for the hunger strikers, being on hunger strike and coming off hunger strike, is to have a meeting with each of the leaders of the parties. So we've already met with the deputy leader of Lib Dems, and he is now committed to setting up a meeting with Joe Swinton. And similarly, we've met with John McDonnell, and he's committed to setting up a meeting with Jeremy. So this is up. They are on hunger strike until they get those meetings, until we get a meeting with Boris. So,
dear.
So sorry.
We're going to die, aren't we?
Yeah. So that's the position basically that the hunger strikers have made really, really clear. So yeah, we're still asking for that meeting. I know that Jonathan met on Monday the 18th, met with Larch, but that was it was a short meeting. On what we've asked for is the full meeting with one of the leaders. So again, it's not to disrespect you, and really appreciate this meeting today, but that's what we've been asking for. That's what the hunger strikers are asking for, is that meeting with one of the leaders. And I appreciate they're busy. They're all really busy. It's an election period, but this is the biggest threat humanity faces, and it requires that level of commitment. The commitment is being shown here. We're dropping our lives to focus on this, to do what we can. So that's, we're willing to fit our timetable in around theirs in order to have that meeting happen. So is it still possible to have that meeting?
And I couldn't speak on behalf of the leaders' diaries, so it would have to be something we'd go back to, especially as time's ticking away. As you'll know, we've just come back from Manchester from last night with the leaders' debates. I wouldn't be able to say what's happening in their timetable. Maybe, Heather, would you?
No, I do not know what their timetable is. No.
sweetheart.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that you know, everyone is really busy, and I can feel my time taking away as well.
Mhm.
And this is really, you know, I just want to put that really forward strongly. That it's urgent. It's really urgent.
Why doesn't the...
And
Sorry.
you know, I know that you can't make decisions for someone else, but I just want to put that forward.
Why doesn't the previous meeting count for the...
Because we were asking for an hour's meeting with, you know, with you know, all of us present, rather than it was just with Larch, with Fun filming it. So it was a 10-minute meeting. You know, so it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't a full hour's
And
meeting.
I was totally inadequate.
I'm sure that wasn't true.
And I was better understood what's happening and the gravity of it all for this presentation and the importance of you two.
Okay, well thank you. We've heard that as well, I think. Thank you very much for your time this
So
morning.
between we will be liaising to find out
Heather, are you happy to continue to be? Yeah,
Great, thank
that's
you.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
So we would like to make a public statement about this meeting. How would you like us to take that forward? Should
Are
we
you going to draft something
Yes.
and bring it back to us? That would be great.
And who should we send that to?
You can either send it to Heather or I, whichever
Okay.
works, and I'll talk to comms team.
Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much.